lifestyle, mental health, uh, close proximity, availability, all those things can influence us being connected at some level. But for the most part, we are designed to transmit our feelings and communicate and learn with one another. And so the Tomasello study was all about kind of looking at the details about how we translate the culture that we have to other people. What kind of factors, what kinds of things that we do that translates culture to under the understanding of culture for other people. Oops. So enculturation and socialization. So if you think about who you socialize with, who are your hangout crew, your hangout buddies, um, whether it's a very tight knit crew of individuals, maybe it may be your kin in your kinship networks, it may be some online friends, especially now in the midst of the pandemic. We might have expanded our online people that we've never met but know over the cyberspace that we include in our kind of socialization and in our friendships, and that in itself is has created a culture. The pandemic has exposed a lot of things and has created a lot of things around how we see ourselves in the world. And you may not have been a person who was much connected through the internet or technology, and you almost had to be forced to, because this is the mode of operation that we are embedded in as now. So internet culture is even a cultural stance now. So if we think about who we become in the context of our culture, we usually there are kind of cultural norms that define who we should be in that in a particular culture. So the story I told at the very beginning of class about being an only child and going to hanging out with my best friend from kindergarten and going up to her house and her mom giving me chores because her children had to do chores, and that was part of their everyday assignments, a part of their life. So this was something that her mother dictated as an important thing that children growing up should have the skill set in. So that could be considered kind of a cultural norm for kids at that time period, and especially for girls and boys. Girls take care of the household, cook and clean and prepare, and boys take care of the outskirts or the protection of the household. So very gender stereotypical, but it was culturally specific in terms of preparing us for being, as far as her mother saw, preparing us for being competent adults, being productive adults. That her girls were not going to grow up not knowing how to cook or knowing about the kitchen and knowing about how to survive in that realm. And even though it was kind of gender role stereotype, even her sons knew how to cook and clean. So they even had a day where they cooked and cleaned. It wasn't as often as the girls, but they also had days. So that was culturally kind of consistent or constant for us in our neighborhood. It wasn't uncommon that, some boys knew how to cook and some girls, that all the girls were supposed to know how to cook. I didn't learn how to cook because my father cooked all the time. So he was teaching no one how to cook other than himself, because that's what he loved to do. So my cooking skills, culinary skills, have evolved as me being a grown adult, wishing that I had paid more attention when I was smaller and had the opportunity to participate in that. And then I would be a better cook, like some friends I have who are excellent cooks. Now, if we talk about this across cultures, We can see gender role stereotypical kinds of what we would define in the Western world as gender stereotypical in terms of roles of women and men. Okay. And in some cases, these roles are reversed. In the case of my particular household, my father cooked, he did laundry, he shopped the grocery store, um, he cleaned, he did all the domestic related things. That's why up until the day my mother passed away, she never did anything domestic because she married a man, married into a marriage for 50 something years where she didn't have to do any of that. And then after he was gone, I was around. And so I took over those skill sets. And I always would say, oh, how lucky she was never to have to do anything but work. But she worked hard. You know, she worked outside the home and held a job. So it wasn't like she was just kicking back and just chilling. But that was very uncommon, especially for people who were got married in the 40s and 50s, to have a husband who was willing to do that. That now in the 21st century, sometimes they're referred to as house husbands or stay-at-home dads who have reverse roles, and moms will be working outside of the household. So we have various variations of that across the world. And then you have cultures that are more paternalistic and more maternalistic. So that can also influence how family structure is devised as well. Okay. So if we talk about kind of the definitions of socialization and enculturation, let's talk about enculturation. Is younger children are learning and adopting ways and manners of their specific culture. So you can be enculturated. You don't necessarily have to be a young person, but you can, when we're talking about older individuals, we are talking about assimilation into a culture. If you've done any study abroad before the pandemic or had planned to do study abroad, many of you may have considered study abroad because you wanted to have the opportunity to be fully immersed in the culture that you're learning about or the language that you're learning. So enculturation to an extent is kind of that immersion from a very young age of learning and adapting the ways and the manners of how the culture is, the cultural norms are for individuals. And that first stop of enculturation is usually your family. Your family, whether you like your family or not, whether it's your biological family or your adopted family or a family system that's non-traditional, this is your first organization that you have been in. So who are those individuals who socialize us? We call them enculturation agents. So these are the people, institutions, organizations that ensure that we are being socialized in the cultural more of the culture that we're embedded in. The first stop, like I said, for the first organization that you're involved in is your family system, however that is defined for you. Now, one theorist that talks about the importance of the ecological system of enculturation is Bronfenbrenner's. And Bronfenbrenner's ecological system and theory is very important for you to learn because he is repeated in various psychology, especially for psychology, sociology, planning to go into medicine, anything dealing with the human services realm. You will probably see Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory referred to or used again. So this is one of the things that you should commit to memory, how this system is developed. Okay, so let's take a look at Bronfenbrenner's. Okay, and I don't know if I can get this any bigger. I don't think I can enlarge when I'm inside the PowerPoint, but it's also listed in your book. You can Google it. There's many examples of Bronfenbrenner's centric circles here. So we start with the individual who is the microsystem, and then we move out from the individual and look at all the things within the culture that is responsible for enculturation and socialization of the individual. So he says we have microsystems, we have mesosystems, exosystems and macro systems. Make sure I got all of them. Micro, meso, exo, macro. Okay. And each one of these centric circles moves back and forward. This is why you see the arrows pointing in both directions. Meaning that if you think of the social learning theory, and we talked about Bandura's reciprocal determinism, this is similar to it. So we'll have family, health services, church groups, neighborhoods, peers, schools being part of that meso system. In the exosystems, these are systems that are where the individual's embedded into, but they may not be as a more direct influence, but some indirect influences that may be impacting the individual. So legal systems, neighborhoods, okay, media, mass media, and social welfare systems as well. And then if we talk about extreme macro systems, we can talk about the rest of the world. So in most cases, when we talk about enculturation, we are often referring to the mesosystems that may be influencing who we are and how we operate within our development of our cultural selves. So think about this. Think about how you have grown up. Some of you all are still growing up. Take advantage of that. And what has influenced you throughout your time from as early as you can remember until now? What have you deemed as important, or who's important? How do you think your caregivers, whoever they may have been, influence who you have become or who you're becoming, and what that